Pleased to be here. My name is Campbell Ferguson. I'm the owner and managing director of Survey Spain. We're chartered surveyors, network of chartered surveyors we've created. We have clients from all over the world, and we help them with properties all over Europe. My background, as you can tell from my name, it's typically Spanish, and I'm from Glasgow and in Scotland. I've been out here since the 1st of November 2001, so it'll be 20 years November this year. I've enjoyed it very much. I feel that we're the good guys to a great extent in that we help people. A number of people that phone us up, and first of all, there is, do you speak English? And we say, well, we're Scottish, but we will try our best to make you understand, or to let you understand. Most of our work comes from the UK and from Ireland, but we're getting quite a lot from Scandinavia, from Denmark, from Germany. We're getting some from Canada and some from the USA. And it's the market just now is very buoyant. The work we carry out is, well, there's two lots of work. The work that's principally of interest, I think, today is the building survey work, where we are asked usually by people before they purchase, can we do a survey and inspection of the property just to check it's not falling down, to check that the services are working. And we also, excuse me, add into that a check on the nota simply, but it's the title extract, and the Cadastral, and what our measurements are of the buildings. And I would say that at least, it must be more than 80%, 90% of the time, there are differences with these, as we all know. But they are becoming less and less so. The Cadastral now is much more accurate. In fact, I would say it's more accurate now often than the nota simply, which could have been written 30, 40 years ago. That was a description of the property then. Somebody's doubled the size, somebody's done this, done that. They may well have all the permissions for it, but they just haven't got around to spending the 1,000 or 2,000 euros it's going to cost to change the nota simply, change the title. So we advise the client on that and draw it to their attention. And often it's with the lawyers as well. We've saved one or two lawyers' embarrassments where we've been able to sort of point out to them, because we measure the property. The lawyer will have the paperwork 100% correct, but it doesn't necessarily describe the property as it is, unless the lawyer's gone out there and done a pretty good amount of due diligence for his client. We had one lawyer that it was up in El Paraíso Alto in Estepona, and the paperwork was all came through and everything. We surveyed the property, and then I thought, when I was looking at the Cadastral, I thought, that driveway goes over the other piece of land. And I pointed this out to the lawyer, and he said, oh, and then one or two expletives. And apparently the land had been, or the one big site had then been split into two. The house had been built, sorry, before it was split into two. The driveway went across there, and the way they drew up the title description, it excluded this piece of driveway which went across the other side. So you could have had it that somebody had a house, and they had to ask somebody else's permission to be able to access that house. Now, when you're talking El Paraíso Alto, it's not going to be a few centimos that's going to be asked there. It's going to be a lot of money. So that's where we saved things. We also save, I think, for agents. We do quite well for them, believe it or not. Maybe they come to us and they say, we're a wee bit worried about some cracking in the house, that we feel that it's going to cause major problems. Or they want to know if it's going to cause major problems. And we go out there. Quite often we can tell them, no, this is just something that happened with houses, with all properties, where you've got the sun on it during the day and the temperatures are going to be up 60, 70 degrees Celsius on that. And then at night it gets down and it gets cold. And if you're up in the hills, it's going to be, it could be down to freezing or below that. So you've got this huge range there. And you've also got the big range in humidity, where you can have 100% humidity when on the rare occasion that it rains. And then you've got it when it's completely dry. So with the expansion and contraction, you're bound to get some differences. You've got different materials that expand and contract at different ways, different sizes, and that causes some cracking. But it's something that you decorate over, as long as you decorate over with a sort of flexible material, that should work fine. And you don't have a major problem with it. We have seen houses along to the east of Malaga where we saw some cracking, and the client said, yeah, it seems to open up at part of the year and then it closes at the other part of the year, and then it opens up again. And in talking with the architect for it, he said, oh, yeah, that's a dancing house. And I thought, dancing house? He said, yeah, it's when the subsoil, the foundations haven't been done properly. And when the subsoil gets wet or whatever, it doesn't have so much, can't support so much, so therefore there's a bit of a movement there. And then when it all dries up again in the summer, there's a bit of movement as it dries up, expands that way. So you get a dancing house. But it's not something that is advised, and there's no music goes with it, so it's a silent dancing house.
So you don't have to pay extra for a dancing house?
No, I would definitely not pay extra for a dancing house.
Okay, so let me just backtrack a little bit then. So the survey services that you offer, this is typically for a buyer that is buying a house, I would imagine, more so than an apartment, although I'm sure they can do it for an apartment too.
No, we do for them all.
What's the most common?
Well, yes, the most common, I would say, is villas, and the larger villas, really, because they're the ones, the more extensive. There's more that can go wrong with them, and certainly older properties as well. There's more that can go wrong. We go up over the mountains into the Campo, and you get properties there that have just been built. You know, it's been a small property that's gradually been built and added to. And so you do tend to get problems with those. So we deal with those, but we also have a lot of apartments that we look at, because things do go wrong in apartments. It's though it's Costa del Sol, noted for its dry weather and all that sort of thing, you've got to remember that for 8 months of the year it's wet. It rains. You get days like today, which are just beautiful. But then you can have 3 or 4 days when there's an east wind, and it will rain much of the time. So you can have a lot of weather, a lot of water. Yeah, just as an aside, I was out today on my bike cycling beside a river, and there's guys there clearing all the debris from the river, obviously in anticipation of the winter rains, the flooding, which is good.
The typical customer, I would imagine, is the buyer, but do you also have sellers taking out the survey?
Yeah, we're trying to encourage that, because if you go to Scandinavia, you go to many of the Northern European countries, including Scotland, when the buyer goes to the house, he's presented with a pack. And that is a survey that's been carried out by an independent surveyor, such as ourselves. And that survey tells the story of the property, you know, defects and all. And that is then for the seller. He knows what he's selling. He knows what people could find wrong with his property. And he's then got to decide, right, do I sort these things myself, or do I leave it as this is how you're getting it? I'm not going to lift a finger anymore on this house. I'm selling, I'm away. So these packs are then handed over to the buyer. The buyer knows exactly what he's getting. He can work out an arrangement with the seller on who's going to do the work, and so on, and the price that takes that all into account. It means that even if it shows up differences in the Cadastral and whatever, and various permissions, it shows those up initially, so that it's not a surprise when you get to the notary and the notary says, well, where's the first occupation license? Oh yeah, right, yes, haven't got that. And, of course, the whole thing just falls apart. So that you get, that's when you get people who do buy here or sell here and think they can do it themselves without using a lawyer. That's the biggest. It must be the most work for lawyers, and it's a lot of work for us, the people that buy and they haven't had a survey. They come to us afterwards and say there's this problem, that problem, or they've had somebody do it who has been, their uncle or somebody like that who just doesn't really know that much about property, or certainly about the defects. That it's all very well being able to design a property beautifully, but we're the guys that see the defects again, the same ones again and again and again.
So have you seen in the cases of here in the Marbella area where there are some spectacular mansions that are sold on a daily basis, and many of these are reformed older properties?
Yeah.
Have you had any experiences of amazement where you've seen a property that's being sold for several million that has something major that, had you not done the survey or had they not requested the survey, would have been a bit of a shock to them?
Not so much on that, I've got to say. What we do find with these things is that so often they're so well built afterwards, as long as the basic concrete structure is okay. If you've got an older structure that where high alumina cement or something like that was used way back, that's going to be crumbling. That's not good news. And there's nothing much you can do about that apart from knocking the whole thing down and starting again. But what we do find with many of the new properties is that they're built so well and they're so tight that there aren't gaps, there aren't things like that. And you get a lot of humidity will build up inside a house just from people living and being in it. And if they don't have proper ventilation in the thing, you get the damp air, the warm, damper air, humid air rises up, and the upper parts of the house, maybe they're not used nearly as much, so they'll be colder. So you get condensation, you get mold, and you get things like that. So that's something that's definitely got to be looked out for. And I'd say a lot of the houses that we see being built just now, that's something that may be a problem in the future, unless they've been built properly with the proper ventilation, to allow for these sorts of things.
What are the most common, would you say, things that you find on these surveys? Particularly in houses.
Yeah, it's damp. Basements. And when you go to a builder and you say, look, you built this house 6 months ago, there's damp coming through already. And he said, I remember one of them just said, every basement's got damp. You always get damp in basements. And I'm saying, well, no, you don't actually. There's no reason for it. The thing is, for an extra day's work, doing things outside, the problem is really outside the building. Doing that proper damp proofing out there, putting proper drains around the building, you won't have that problem. But just they skimp and they'll slap on a bit of bitumen paint onto the concrete, onto the brickwork, and think, well, that's it. But that paint, and then they dump all the soil and everything against it. And the acids in the soil eat through the bitumen quickly, and then they go and they saturate the structure itself, and so you get damp showing through on the inside. You get people who are irrigating their houses, their gardens, beautiful gardens, really lush, but the only problem is a lot of that damp is then getting guided towards the house itself, and you get damp coming in there. And the biggest thing that gets me is the lack of guttering, which I know aesthetically it's not the prettiest, but you can design it so that it's part of the roof structure and isn't on the edge, it's just on the inside of the edge. But you've got all the rain landing on the roof. It comes down and it pours straight down, either pouring down the walls or onto the ground immediately around the walls. So that area is going to be soaked. And if that happens time and again, of course, that damp is going to go into the house. That will appear in the basement, first of all, but then you can get damp running along the floor of the concrete floor of the ground floor itself, underneath the tiling, and then will appear. One of the first houses I looked at, I can remember in Manila, when I was down here, the house was fine except for damp right in the middle of the house. And there was no pipes near it, there was nothing. I just couldn't work out how it's happened at all. So I brought an architect or technical I know in, and he said, I've seen this before. And he showed me that there was a flower bed that was being irrigated, and the water from that was flowing in onto the concrete floor. The concrete floor wasn't completely level, so it was flowing down to the lowest point, which just happened to be where this wall was built. And so the wall was sucking up the water. And that's why there was damp there. So you took away the irrigation, you put more insulation against the wall, and then you've got to wait. It can take 2, 3, 4 years for it to dry out if you just leave it. If you lift the flooring and the sand and the bedding for the tiles, if you lift those and take away the plaster and the lower part of the wall, you can dry it out within 2 or 3 months of a summer, and then you put that all back down and you shouldn't have a problem. But these are the things, but it's definitely, it's damp is the big thing. With the 10-year decennial insurance that there is, that has, I think that stopped so much structural problems, because the insurance company supervises the pouring of the concrete for the actual structure. You know, for the foundations, the pillars, the floor plates. What it doesn't cover usually is the brickwork, the infill bricking, but brick between the things, between the pillars. And so that wall could fall out, and it would be, I'm terribly sorry, it's not structural. Just put a new window in, and you've got that. So structurally, we don't see that many problems. Unless there's been undermining by water, by a stream or something like that hasn't been treated properly, or the drainage around a house maybe hasn't been treated properly, especially where it's cut into a hillside and you've got a big head of water up on that hillside. It's coming down, and suddenly there's this house in the way and it pushes against it, and then it can be guided, it can go underneath the foundations and start undermining those. That's when you could have problems.
How long does a typical survey take from instruction to delivery of the report?
Usually we can get out there within 2 or 3 days to look at the place. It depends how busy we are, depends on where it is, and so on. Then within 24 to 48 hours, we will give an email, a headline email to the client. Everything goes just 100% to the client, nobody else. And we give them that there, which tells them, basically it tells them if there's major problems, or what if there are smaller problems and things like that, to do with the physical side of things, that tells them about it. The actual report itself, once he's written that, the surveyor's written that, he then fills out the template which we have provided for our reports. He fills that out, and that's then sent to me. I'm the guy that signs off all the reports. Once again, depending on how busy I am. But it can be, I would say, the whole process, if you say 2 or 3 days to get access to it, 24 hours, 48 hours for the headline thing, and then maybe another 3 days or something like that for the final report to be delivered to the client. So you could say it could be done within a week, 10 days on the outside. That's what it should be. Sometimes it takes a bit longer if there's major problems, if we find things that we've got to check up on and so on, then it can take a wee bit longer. But that should be the thing. If the agent has all the paperwork and everything ready, it speeds things up tremendously, including the energy certificate. that is becoming more and more important, that people are going to be wanting to see it. The price of electricity now is going up and up and up. So if you've got a house that's G rated, the lowest rating, the poorest, it's going to cost you a whole lot more to run than a house that's up A, B, or C. The energy rating we certainly push it to our clients that you want to get that energy rating. And the agents are taking risks not doing it because unless they've actually instructed somebody to do it, they can't just say in preparation on the thing not having done anything about it. They've got to instruct somebody to do it, and then they can get away with not showing it on their website. But the fines are quite large, and they will fine both the agent and the owner of the property. So the agent's going to have a severely annoyed client or former client because he's not going to be using them anymore if they get fined for not having the energy certificate.
I would imagine that the relationship between surveyors and agents over here could be a tenuous one at times, because you may be perceived as someone that may be putting a delay or pouring water on a sweet deal that's about to go through. But by the same token, most agents here on the coast aren't the listing agents. It's all shared listings. So they're acting more like a buyer's agent. And as a buyer's agent, they should be looking after the interests of the buyer, not the seller. So what is your experience with agents in this regard?
We want to be friends with agents, but whether they want to be friends with us is quite another thing. Well, it's not really, because it's yes, we shouldn't slow things down, because if you think of it, that normally people take the property off the market maybe for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they put down their initial small deposit of 5,000, 6,000 or something like that. During that time, we can do our work. So we are just part of the due diligence work, the initial due diligence work that's done during that time. So we shouldn't be delaying things. What we will do maybe is we show up, we alert our client that there are problems. You mentioned about the buyers, the people being a buyer's agent. At the end of the day, who pays their fee? Their fee is paid by the seller or through the seller's agent. So at the end of the day, if the seller says jump, they're going to have to jump. Whereas if the seller says jump to us, we'll say thank you very much, but we are working for our client 100%. And that's the principal difference, I would say, that way. That agents, unless they're getting paid a fee directly by the buyer and not accepting anything from the seller, they're in a difficult position, because many of them will be making friendships with the buyers.
So I see from your website that amongst the many services that your company offers, one of them is the investment/development appraisals. And given that here in the Costa del Sol, it's a hotbed for investment and development, I just wondered if you could explain a little bit about what that service involves. Okay,
on the investment side, we do a lot of work for investors, where we provide an independent chartered surveyor's RICS valuation of the property or the development itself. We do a full appraisal of it, basically working out what its market value is when it'll be finished, working out what the costs are going to be to achieve that, and therefore what the profit will be and the return on investment. Very, very briefly summarised. If only it was that easy. But if it was that easy, nobody would ask us to do it. But there we are. So we do that. On the investor side, yes, we provide RICS valuations, RICS valuations. These tend to be the standard for worldwide standard valuations that are accepted by investors, by banks, by whatever worldwide. However, except Spain. And I think it basically goes back to the courts because if you want to have, if you're lending on a development, lending on anything here, you want that to be registered in the registry. And the registry demands a valuation linked to that, an auction valuation, which is a sort of the minimum price that it will be auctioned at. And unfortunately, the court, if that was queried, it would then go to the court, and then the court, unfortunately, at the moment, doesn't accept RICS surveyors, RICS valuations, and that's the problem.
For foreign investors?
For foreign investors, they much prefer RICS valuations because they don't understand the Tasador valuations. The Tasadors are guided by or regulated by the Bank of Spain, which has its regulations which go down to the minutiae of how to do it, what's to be taken into account, what's not to be taken into account. And in general things, these are okay, but some of the things that they have, it's the reason why many people, when they want a mortgage, they are disappointed with the mortgage value that comes out. The mortgage value follows all the regulations, but it doesn't reflect the true market, whereas RICS valuations reflect, our valuations are the current market value of the property on the day we carry out the valuation. That's the thing that always surprises me, that the Tasador valuations are, that's your valuation for 6 months. Now, we all know in any market, basically, it can change over 6 months. It can change over 6 days very easily. So that our valuation is the valuation on that day that we do it. Yes, we will, if nothing changes, it will continue to be the valuation. But you'd have to ask us again, do you think there's been a change in the last 3 months? And we quite often get that. And we provide just that comment, as part of our service, part of the initial valuation service.
Final question then for you. New developments, again, big thing here on the Costa del Sol especially, but also on the Costa Blanca. Going back to surveys for a second, is that a service that you can provide for people looking to buy off plan? And at what point are you able to check this? Well, how does it work in that sense?
Yeah, it's a snagging service, as it's called. When we are allowed to go into the property, this is the problem that there is often. When a place is being built, it's the contractor that's in charge of the site. It's his insurance that's covering it, and they don't allow just anybody to wander around and look around at the building. At the very least, we've got to have our hard hats and all that sort of thing. But most times we're brought in when the developer has said, right, we finished the place, we'll be going to the notary in a couple of weeks' time. Hopefully we're given at least a couple of weeks to do our job. You can now come and look at the property. But there is, apparently in law, there is no right for buyers to look at a property prior to it becoming into their ownership, which to me is madness, because you're effectively, as a courtesy, the developer who is by that time has taken over the property from the contractor. He'll have snagged it, but he'll maybe have been snagging 130 apartments or something like that. And it'll be a bit of, okay, it'll take them a couple of days to go around it, but they're not going to be as exact as an individual who's looking at his one apartment. And so we get into eventually we get into the place one way or another, and we do a full survey, full inspection of the property, just to check there's no obvious faults in it. We also check that it's been built to the specification that was promised. And that specification can change between what the architect has written and what has been marketed. We've found that on occasions, and it's courts. My understanding is that courts have said that marketing material is relevant to a development, so that somebody can claim against the developer if his marketing material has been false, whilst all the plans and things might have been correct. So we do that, and we compare the specification with what's there. We compare, the client often has extras. We check that they've all been installed. and we make out a checklist, a snagging list of the problems. How we put it is, there's the location of the fault, the description of the fault, our opinion of why it's happened, and our opinion on what's our recommendation of what could be done to repair it. We do that in both English and Spanish, because there's no point in handing over a list of things in English to a Spanish electrician or plumber or whatever who may not have English, that may not know it. So we have it in Spanish and in English.
Right. So the idea is that the buyer then gives this list over to the developer and says, "Here's my snagging list. Crack on."
That's right. And the developer will then go, "Oh, right," and then he's got to go back to the contractor and say, "Do this, do that, do the whatever." The contractor, in theory, is responsible for the property for a year. Really, basically anything that goes wrong, except if it's been caused by somebody else, it's caused by an owner bumping things, damaging things, or whatever. The next 2 years, they're responsible for major problems that stop the place basically being habitable. Major leaks, major electrical problems, and so on. And then there's the decennial insurance, which is the 10-year insurance policy to do with the structure. And that's basically it.
How good is the standard of building by developers here in the Costa del Sol on average?
It has improved hugely. Where we saw it deteriorating from 2000 onwards, I would say, where there weren't the builders, there weren't the skilled tradesmen around, and they were pulling people in from high end, with no offence to high end, but if you know olives, it doesn't necessarily mean you know how to put up brickwork or put plaster on. That was where things deteriorated. Then there's the big crash. All these people go wherever and go back home again or whatever. The tradesmen, however, are still here, and they're the skilled men are here. They've maybe made some money. They maybe set up their own business and things. And now we're coming into a time again where there's a lot of building going on, and the difficulty is going to be getting the trades to build properly. So I think this will be the thing. Things will be rushed on as well, and the developer knows that he's got his profit and the final part of his costs are going to be all covered at the notary when there's this final payment. So he's pushing on and pushing on all the time. The agent knows he's not going to get his fee or his full fee until that happens. And so there is a lot of a rush and pressure on buyers for that. But they've got to make sure that they get what they contracted for. But I would say most of the time, I certainly wouldn't put people off buying new. No, most of the time it's good. The standards, the building regulations, the requirements have increased every time there's a renewal of them. They're increased, they're better, a higher standard, so that a modern property is probably of a higher standard than one that was built, say, 10 years ago. However, sometimes you don't need that standard. You don't need it that high. That's the problem. It can go too much. When we look at it, when we're doing the valuations, which is the other side of our business, when we're doing the valuations, we can look at a new development and the prices of that. And then next door, there's one that's maybe 10 years old. And it'll be 30%, 40% less than this new development. And the big problem is going to be when the people that bought in the new development want to sell on again, because their properties are going to then be matched not just with the ones around them, but with the one next door. And people are going to say, well, why are you asking 30% more than the guy next door? We might as well go next door. It gives us all we require, and it's 30% less. So that's they can spend some of that 30% doing it up and still get money back. So this is the problem with new properties. But certainly with a new property, you will get a better spec in general. than older properties.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's a good insight. And there'll be a link to your website either above, if it's LinkedIn, or below on YouTube.
Yeah.
Are you ahead of time or behind times with those Christmas lights behind you?
You're not the only one, and it has been discussed within the family, let's put it that way. But my wife likes to have that up, have those up, because she says they look pretty at night. And you're not the first by any means to mention these Christmas. And I did seriously think, do I take them down? And then I thought, no, it's too much hassle. Both trying to explain why I'm taking them down, and then having to put them all back up again.